They say life can be quiet like dawn before thunder strikes, that a person walking on soft ground may not know there's fire beneath until the soles of their feet begin to burn. Such is the way destiny tests the heart, silently, then suddenly. And that was how it began for Adanna, a woman whose gentleness made even the morning breeze slow down to listen when she spoke. Adanna grew up in Nsukka, in a compound where every rooster crowed like it owned the village. Her father, a retired teacher, raised her on discipline and dignity, while her mother, Mama Nena, ran a small provision store near the bus park. From childhood, Adanna was known for her neatness. She washed her clothes until they looked whiter than harmattan clouds. Even when others mocked her for being quiet, she always said, "When the river is deep, it does not make noise." Years later, she would carry that same calm into Lagos, the city that eats both the humble and the proud. She got a job as an accountant in a shipping company at Apapa, and through hard work and honesty, she rose fast. That was where she met Tobi, tall, ambitious, and charming in the way men who know they are handsome often are. He wore success like a perfume. His words came smooth as palm wine in the evening. Adanna, in her innocence, mistook confidence for kindness. Their first conversation was about a misplaced invoice, but his smile carried promises far beyond office talk. Within a year, Tobi proposed. He said she was his peace, his home, his everything. And on their wedding day, when the choir sang "This God is Too Good," Adanna cried tears she thought were joy. Her father held her hands and whispered, "My daughter, love is good, but never lose yourself inside it." She nodded, but her heart was already walking into a new life, one she believed would last forever. They moved into a modest apartment in Lekki Phase 2, where Tobi's friends often gathered to drink and talk business. He worked as a consultant, always chasing deals that sounded larger than life. Adanna, now a senior financial officer, became the quiet pillar at home, cooking, budgeting, encouraging, praying. At first, everything looked fine. Laughter at the dining table, whispered dreams before sleep. But success is like wine. It exposes who a person truly is. Joel. When Adanna's company offered her a long-term investment plan, she studied it carefully. It was an internal innovation program. Employees could co-own small spin-off subsidiaries through shared capital and management effort. She joined the program, managing accounts and making sound decisions. Within 6 years, the subsidiary, now known as AD Holdings, grew beyond expectation. What she didn't realize was that through strategic mergers and silent buyouts, her shares had multiplied. Until one morning, her former boss, now retiring, handed her a sealed envelope and said, "Adanna, you are the future of this company. The ownership transition has been completed. Congratulations." Inside that envelope was confirmation. She was the majority shareholder, effectively the CEO of what had become a billion-dollar conglomerate. She was stunned. She hadn't pursued wealth, it had followed her faithfulness. But she said nothing to Tobi that night. She wanted to tell him at the right time, when love was calm, when his heart would celebrate her without fear. But Tobi was changing. He began to come home later, smelling of imported whiskey and strange perfume. His laughter, once warm, became sharp. He mocked her simplicity. "Adanna, you still wear these plain Ankara gowns like a church usher," he would say, pouring himself another drink. "Don't you want to look like a real wife of a successful man?" She would smile faintly and reply, "My success is not in what I wear, but in what I carry in my heart." He would laugh and shake his head as if her words were stones tossed into water. Then came the woman, Cynthia, light-skinned, heavily made up, always wearing designer clothes with price tags louder than her conscience. She owned a fashion boutique in Victoria Island, and Tobi said she was just a client. But clients don't send late-night messages or leave lipstick on a man's collar. Adanna noticed but kept quiet. In African homes, silence is sometimes mistaken for weakness, but hers was the silence of a woman watching the rain to know where the leak starts. Months passed, and Tobi's disdain grew. He began to control every detail of her life, her clothes, her outings, even her laughter. He would say, "You're lucky I married you. No man wants a woman who talks too little." Yet, when she spoke, he would bark, "You argue too much." It was as if peace itself offended him. Adanna continued managing AD Holdings discreetly, letting her trusted assistant handle public affairs. She still woke early, cooked his meals, ironed his shirts, and prayed before dawn. Her quiet strength was like the root of a tree, unseen but unshakable. Then one Saturday evening, everything changed. Tobi walked in with Cynthia, bold as daylight. Adanna was in the kitchen, frying plantain, when she heard footsteps and laughter. She turned and froze. Cynthia stood there in a tight red gown, holding Tobi's arm as if she owned it. He looked at Adanna and said, "Meet Cynthia. I told her to come. You're not the kind of woman I want anymore. You're too local." Adanna's heart pounded like talking drums. "Tobi," she whispered, "you brought another woman into our home." He shrugged. "This house, I pay the rent. You can leave if you like. I'm tired of living with a woman who doesn't fit my status." Her hand trembled, oil sizzling on the stove. "What status?" she asked softly. "The one that forgets respect." But he wasn't listening. He poured himself a drink while Cynthia smirked, pulling out her phone to record the moment. Adanna turned away, tears stinging her eyes but refusing to fall. She whispered a prayer only heaven could hear. "God, give me strength not to break where I should bend." That night, she packed her clothes quietly. She took nothing of his, not the jewelry, not the furniture, just her Bible, her documents, and her mother's old wrapper. As she walked out, Tobi said coldly, "Good riddance. Maybe your village morals will keep you company." She didn't look back. For weeks, she stayed with her friend Ifoma in Surulere, trying to heal. Her world felt empty, yet inside that emptiness, peace began to grow again. Meanwhile, Tobi and Cynthia paraded their new life on social media, luxury dinners, flashy cars, matching outfits. People who once admired Adanna whispered behind her back, "See her, her husband has moved on, she must have been the problem." She smiled through it all. She had seen enough to know that truth doesn't shout, it waits. One afternoon, she got a call from the company's board. There was an emergency meeting. The global partners wanted to meet the new CEO in person for an official announcement. Adanna arrived dressed in a navy blue suit, her hair in a neat bun, her face calm. When she walked into the conference hall, cameras flashed. A banner read, "Welcome to the new era of AD Holdings, led by our visionary CEO, Mrs. Adanna Tobi Okafor." Yes, her name was still on the papers. Tobi had no idea. When the news hit the media, it spread like wildfire. A few blogs even ran the headline, "Lagos woman quietly becomes billionaire CEO after husband's divorce." By evening, Tobi's phone was buzzing with calls from friends asking, "Guy, is that your wife they're talking about?" He laughed it off, thinking it was a mistake. But when he turned on the TV and saw Adanna addressing shareholders with confidence, his drink slipped from his hand. He drove straight to her office the next morning, dressed neatly, smiling like a man trying to remember forgotten love. "Adanna," he said softly, "you didn't tell me about all this." She looked at him, her calm gaze sharper than any knife. "There was a lot you didn't ask," she replied. He laughed nervously. "Come on, don't be like that. I made mistakes. Let's fix things." She tilted her head. "Fix things? Tobi, you didn't break a chair. You broke a home." He tried to hold her hand, but she stepped back. "I prayed for you," she said quietly. "Not that you'd return, but that I'd forgive you when you do." His smile faded. "You think you're better than me now because of money?" She shook her head. "Money doesn't make anyone better. It only reveals who they've always been." Her secretary entered to remind her of a board call. Adanna nodded and turned to leave. "Tobi," she said as she walked away, "I wish you peace, the kind you never gave me." He stood there, speechless, watching the woman he had once mocked now commanding the room like a queen born of patience. That night, Toby sat in Cynthia's luxury apartment, silent. The laughter that once filled their nights was gone. Cynthia scrolled through social media, sighing. "Babe, you didn't tell me she was this rich." Toby frowned. "How was I supposed to know?" She chuckled coldly. "You should have checked before you threw her away." He glared at her. "What do you mean by that?" She smirked. "Just saying, some mistakes are expensive." For weeks after that encounter, Toby drifted through his days like a man chasing shadows. His pride had become his prison, and the walls were closing in. Each morning he'd scroll through news about Adanna, his heart tightening with a strange mix of regret and disbelief. She appeared in magazines, giving interviews where she spoke humbly about hard work, integrity, and God's timing. "Wealth," she said in one interview, "is not about what you hold in your hand, but what holds your heart." The nation adored her. Even people who never knew her name before now called her the calm storm of Lagos business. Meanwhile, Cynthia's charm began to fade like cheap perfume. Her laughter became sharp, her words bitter. "Toby, you need to get your act together," she snapped one morning as she adjusted her eyelashes in the mirror. "All you do is sulk around. You're not even hustling like before. I can't keep sponsoring everything." He looked at her, stunned. "Sponsoring?" she smirked. "Who paid the last rent here? Who bought that watch on your wrist?" The words hit him like cold water. For the first time, he realized he had become what he once despised, a dependent man, living off someone else's shine. He tried to laugh it off, but Cynthia wasn't done. "You dumped your wife because you thought I had everything. Now I see why she left quietly." "You don't have direction, Toby. You just talk." He stood there in silence, his ego burning, but his words stuck in his throat. Later that night, as Cynthia slept, he went out to the balcony, staring at the Lagos skyline. The same city that once made him feel invincible now mocked him with its lights. Cars honked in the distance, the night air heavy with rain. He whispered it, "God, where did I go wrong?" But even heaven seemed to ignore him. Across town, Adanna sat alone in her quiet mansion in Banana Island, a home she had bought not for display, but for peace. She still preferred to eat at her small wooden table, the same one she once used in Lekki. Easy. Success had not changed her soul, it had only deepened her gratitude. Her staff adored her humility. She greeted them by name, asked about their families, and still joined the cooks occasionally to make ogbono soup, the real village way. But despite her success, Adanna's nights were not without pain. Sometimes she'd wake up from dreams of the past, Toby's laughter, his promises, their first home. She'd sit by the window, whispering prayers for closure. Her friend Ifeoma often visited, bringing warmth and laughter. "My sister," Ifeoma would tease, "you're now the talk of the town. Every man in Lagos is praying for your number." Adanna would smile gently. "Let them keep praying. I'm still healing. A wound may close, but it remembers." One Sunday morning after church, Adanna decided to visit her old neighborhood in Lekki. The streets felt smaller than she remembered. At a junction, she saw an elderly woman selling roasted corn. The woman smiled. "Madam, fine woman like you still dey eat corn." Adanna laughed softly and bought two. As she chewed, she thought of her mother and the simplicity she missed. She didn't notice the man across the street watching her, Toby. He had been living nearby since Cynthia threw him out a week earlier after a heated argument about money. He looked unkempt, his once polished shoes dusty, his confidence cracked. When he saw Adanna, something inside him broke completely. She was glowing, peaceful, beautiful in a way he never saw before. He wanted to run to her, to fall on his knees and beg, but shame held his legs like chains. He watched silently until she drove away, tears stinging his eyes. Later that evening, he called her. The phone rang once, twice, then she picked up. Her voice was calm, polite. "Hello?" "Adanna, it's me." "I know," she said quietly. "Can we talk, please? Just once." There was a long pause, then she replied, Toby, we said all we needed to. What more is left? He swallowed hard. Forgiveness. She sighed softly. I forgave you long ago, but forgiveness doesn't always mean return. I've changed, he said quickly. She hesitated, her voice lowering. People change for love, not for loneliness. Which one is yours? He had no answer. The silence stretched until she ended the call gently. The next few months were hard for Toby. Jobs were scarce, his reputation faded, and his friends stopped picking his calls. Even Cynthia, now flaunting another wealthy man, blocked him. He began driving Bolt rides to survive, hiding under a face cap. Some passengers would talk about Adanna's foundation, how she was sponsoring widows, training single mothers, and building schools in rural areas. He would just nod quietly, heart heavy with regret. Meanwhile, Adanna continued to rise. Her humility drew investors like bees to honey. She never announced her wealth, it spoke through her actions. But behind her calm, she carried a quiet loneliness. Not for Toby, but for genuine companionship. One day, during a charity event in Abuja, she met Nsukka, a widowed architect with a soft voice and steady eyes. He had 2 daughters, both in secondary school, and a gentle heart that mirrored hers. Their first conversation was about purpose. You remind me of someone who has seen pain and refused to let it turn her bitter, he said. She smiled faintly, maybe because bitterness is too heavy for a healed heart. He laughed. Then you are healed indeed. From that day, their friendship grew, slowly, sincerely. He never asked about her past, he simply walked beside her present. Back in Lagos, Toby's life sank deeper into misery. He sold his car to pay debts, his apartment to clear loans. One rainy evening, he found himself sitting under the Lekki Bridge, drenched, staring at nothing. His phone rang, an unknown number. Mr. Tobi Okafor? A voice asked. Kit tu sais skip ozacht? Yes. This is from the bank. Your house has been repossessed. Please vacate by Friday. He laughed bitterly. Even God has repossessed my peace, he muttered. That night he went to sleep in a small wooden shed behind a filling station. The mosquitoes sang like a cruel choir. As thunder rolled, he thought of Adanna again. Her kindness, her patience, her eyes when she said, I wish you peace. He wept silently. The next morning, he walked to a nearby church. It was small, built with corrugated iron sheets. The choir was singing, On Christ the solid rock I stand. He sat at the back, head bowed. When the pastor asked if anyone wanted prayers for a second chance, Toby stood. I lost everything because of pride, he said softly. And I don't even know how to start again. The congregation prayed for him. For the first time in years, he felt something real, the beginning of repentance. Days later, Adanna received a message from the same church. The pastor wrote, Madam, a man named Tobi Okafor worships here now. He seems broken and sincere. I thought you should know. She read it twice, then closed her phone without replying. She wasn't angry, she just didn't know what to feel. Weeks passed. Her friendship with Nsukka deepened. He introduced her to his daughters, and she took to them like a mother. They would bake on weekends, laughing as flour covered their faces. It was the kind of peace she had long prayed for, quiet, stable, true. Still, sometimes at night she'd sit by the window and whisper, God, I hope he's okay. Then one day, fate circled back. Adanna was driving through Yaba when she saw a man struggling to push a wheelbarrow loaded with scrap metal. Something about his posture struck her. She slowed down. It was Toby. His shirt was torn, his beard unkempt, sweat running down his face. Without thinking, she parked. Toby, she called softly. He turned, blinking in disbelief. Adanna? His voice cracked. She stepped closer. What happened to you? He laughed weakly. Life happened. My pride happened. Her eyes glistened. You should have called me if you needed help. He looked down. After everything I did to you, I can't even call myself your husband. I don't deserve your kindness. She paused, studying his face. The same man who once mocked her now standing in rags. "Toby," she said gently, "what we deserve is not always what God gives. Sometimes he gives mercy instead." He broke down, falling to his knees. "Adanna, I'm sorry, not because you're rich, because I see now that you were the blessing I threw away." She knelt beside him, helping him up. "Get up, you can start again." She took him to a rehabilitation center her foundation supported. There, he got treatment, counseling, and small jobs. Adanna visited occasionally, bringing food and clothes, but always keeping emotional distance. She didn't want pity to confuse purpose. After months of steady progress, Toby regained strength. One afternoon, during a foundation event, he volunteered to speak. Standing before the crowd, he said, "My name is Tobi Okafor. I once had a good wife and lost her because I worshipped pride. If you ever think someone is beneath you, remember, dust and gold come from the same ground." The hall went silent, then filled with applause. Adanna watched from the back, tears in her eyes. Not of pain, but of peace. Nsukka glanced at her, holding her hand gently. "You did what many wouldn't," he whispered. "You turned hurt into healing." She smiled faintly. "I just followed the path that pain cleared for me." In the months that followed, Toby found purpose helping other men rebuild their lives. He often quoted Adanna's favorite saying, "A calm spirit is stronger than pride." He started teaching small financial literacy classes at the center, using the little he knew. Adanna's foundation later made him a community outreach officer, a quiet mercy she never announced. One evening, as the sun bled gold over the lagoon, Adanna and Nsukka sat on the balcony of her mansion. He looked at her with admiration. "You've built empires, yet your heart still beats like a villager's." She chuckled. "Maybe because I never stopped being one," he smiled. "Would you let a man like me walk beside you, not to complete you, but to continue life with you?" Her heart fluttered softly. She didn't answer immediately. She just watched the sunset, the same sky that once saw her tears now painting her peace. "Maybe," she said finally, "because love should not be loud, it should be true." Across town, Toby watched the same sunset from the center's courtyard, surrounded by men who now looked up to him. He whispered, "Thank you, Lord, for letting me fall where I could learn to stand again." There are seasons when destiny walks softly into the room, yet its footsteps change everything. That was how the next chapter of Adanna's life began, quietly, without noise or celebration. The storm of her past had passed, and peace had returned like dew after drought. Yet peace does not mean life stops. It only means life begins again, differently. Months turned into years, and Adanna's name became a symbol of dignity across Nigeria. She was no longer just a businesswoman. She was a voice for those whose voices had been buried by shame and betrayal. Her foundation grew branches across states, training widows in trade, sending orphans to school, and sponsoring rural women to learn digital skills. Her speeches were simple but powerful. She often said, "Kindness is not weakness. It is wisdom in motion." In public, she shone with grace. In private, she still lived simply. Every morning, she walked barefoot across her garden, touching the hibiscus petals the way her mother used to. The scent of wet earth reminded her that no matter how high one rises, life begins from dust. She still cooked her own breakfast on weekends. Yam and fried eggs with too much pepper, just the way she liked it. Her house staff adored her because she treated them as family, not servants. Nsukka became her quiet companion in this new phase. He never rushed her, never tried to impress her with grand gestures. His gentleness was steady, his laughter healing. He would often drop by her office with suya wrapped in newspaper saying, "Even billionaires deserve street food sometimes." She'd laugh, sit with him in her office balcony, and they would eat while watching the city lights of Lagos shimmer like a restless ocean. The connection between them grew deeper, not of romance alone, but of respect and shared peace. Still, Adanna was cautious. Her heart, though healed, carried memory. "I'm not afraid of love," she told Ifoma one evening as they sat sipping zobo by the poolside. "I just want it to feel safe." Ifoma nodded. "You deserve that safety, my sister, but don't build your peace into a prison. Sometimes love knocks again just to show it has learned manners." Adanna smiled, looking into the red drink as if searching for reflection. "Maybe," she said softly, "and maybe this time I'll open the door slowly." Meanwhile, Tobi's life took a different rhythm. He had become something unexpected, a humble man with purpose. The rehabilitation center, now expanded with Adanna's sponsorship, was thriving. Men who once thought their lives were over found hope through Tobi's guidance. He would wake before dawn, sweep the compound, then gather them for morning devotion. His voice, once arrogant, had softened with wisdom. He told them, "The proud man sees others as small until he falls low enough to see how big mercy really is." He kept a small notebook filled with lessons from his journey. On the first page, he wrote, "Pride made me lose everything. Grace gave me back purpose." On the last page, he wrote, "If I could speak to my younger self, I'd tell him, humility is not losing, it's learning." That book would later travel far beyond what he imagined. One evening, as the centre prepared for its annual fundraiser, Adanna arrived unannounced. The men were setting up chairs, some singing, some arranging sound systems. When Tobi saw her, his breath caught. She wore a simple white gown with gold embroidery at the neck, her hair wrapped in a low bun, her face glowing under the fading sunset. She walked with quiet dignity, greeting each volunteer warmly. When she reached him, she smiled gently. "You've built something beautiful here." He lowered his head. "No, Adanna, you built it. I just helped shape what your kindness started." She shook her head. "You found purpose. That's yours, not mine." They talked for a while. About the centre, about life, about forgiveness that keeps renewing itself. He told her how the men respected her like a mother. She told him how proud she was to see him, leading with humility. For a long moment, they simply stood in silence, the wind carrying the sound of distant traffic. When she was leaving, he said, "Adanna, if God ever allows me to love again, I pray I'll love with your kind of heart." She turned to him, eyes soft. "Then love won't destroy you this time. It will rebuild you." The next morning, pictures of the fundraiser flooded social media. People praised Adanna's humility for supporting her ex-husband's work. Some said, "She's a queen without bitterness." Others wrote, "She didn't just forgive, she elevated him." Adanna ignored the noise. To her, it wasn't a performance, it was peace. Time kept moving. A year later, Nsukka proposed quietly at her mother's graveside in Nsukka. He didn't kneel with flowers or photographers. He simply held her hand and said, "Let me walk the rest of this road beside you, as softly as your mother's prayers follow you." She wept silently, not from sadness, but from gratitude. That night, she whispered in prayer, "God, if this is your will, let love be gentle this time." They married 6 months later in a simple garden ceremony. Only close friends and family attended. Even Tobi was there, seated quietly in the third row. When Adanna saw him, she nodded, and he smiled faintly, a smile that said, "Thank you for letting Grace win." During the reception, Tobi presented her with a small wrapped box. Inside was his notebook of lessons, tied with a ribbon. On the first page, he had written in neat handwriting, "To Adanna, for teaching me that forgiveness is stronger than pride." She hugged him briefly. "You've become a better man," she whispered. He shook his head. "No, I just finally met myself." Life settled into rhythm again. Adanna continued her business and foundation work. Nsukka handled architecture projects across Africa. Together, they built not just wealth, but legacy. They started an initiative called the Dignity Project, focusing on empowering people who had faced public shame, teaching them to rise with dignity, not revenge. When asked what inspired it, Adanna would say simply, "Pain taught me better than any teacher." 2 years later, AD Holdings became one of Africa's top conglomerates, partnering with global investors. Yet, Adanna remained grounded. She still attended Sunday church quietly, still stopped at roadside markets to buy roasted plantain, still smiled at strangers. The newspapers called her the billionaire with a village heart. Tobi, now a counselor and motivational speaker, began traveling across states to share his story. His talks were raw, unpolished, but real. He'd stand before men in correctional centers saying, "I once had a throne and threw it away because I mistook ego for strength. Don't wait for life to humble you. Choose humility yourself." His words changed lives. One day, a journalist interviewed him, asking, "Do you still love your ex-wife?" He smiled. "I don't need to. Love matured into respect, and that's even deeper." Adanna saw the interview on television and smiled quietly. "He finally understands," she murmured. Nsukka, sitting beside her, nodded. "Some journeys are long because God wants the lessons to sink deep." Then came the day that would test everything once again. A major economic downturn hit, shaking businesses across the country. AD Holdings faced a massive scandal when an international partner defaulted on contracts, and the media began spinning rumors. Some claimed the company would collapse. Others said Adanna had mismanaged funds. It was a storm meant to break her reputation. Tobi heard the news and immediately traveled to Lagos. Without invitation, he walked into the press conference where reporters hurled accusations at Adanna. Standing in front of the cameras, he said firmly, "I was once her husband, and if there's one truth I know, it's that Adanna never cheats, never lies, and never steals. She builds with integrity even when no one is watching." The crowd fell silent. Reporters looked stunned. Adanna turned to him, speechless. He continued, "Serious. If you doubt her, look at the lives she has changed, including mine." His statement went viral. Overnight, the narrative changed. People praised his courage and her grace. By the following week, investigations cleared her name completely. She invited him to her office to thank him. "You didn't have to do that," she said softly. He smiled. "Yes, I did. Once upon a time, I spoke lies about you in whispers. This time, I wanted to speak truth loudly." She smiled. "You've redeemed your voice." He laughed lightly. "And you've redeemed my soul." They sat together for a while, not as ex-lovers, but as two souls who had survived life's furnace and come out purer. She handed him an envelope. "What's this?" he asked. "A new start," she said. Inside was an appointment letter, director of the Dignity Project, with a steady salary and full benefits. He looked at her, overwhelmed. "You trust me with this?" She nodded. "I trust who you've become." As years rolled by, their paths intertwined, not romantically, but in purpose. Adanna and Nsukka continued expanding their humanitarian work, while Tobi built counseling centers across West Africa. Their lives became living proof that forgiveness doesn't always lead back to love, but it can lead to peace. One afternoon, long after the noise of fame had quieted, Adanna visited her old house in Lekki. It was abandoned, the paint faded, the windows dusty. She walked through the empty rooms where she once cried herself to sleep. She touched the wall of the kitchen where oil once splattered as she fried plantain for Tobi and whispered on, "Thank you, God, for not letting my story end here." She left a single hibiscus flower on the doorstep before leaving, a symbol of closure. Years later, Tobi published his first book titled The Fall That Raised Me. It became a national bestseller, filled with lessons about pride, love, and redemption. In the dedication, he wrote, "To the woman who taught me that forgiveness is the purest form of power." When Adanna received a signed copy, she placed it on her shelf beside her Bible. She didn't cry this time, she smiled. The final turning of their journey came quietly. During one of their foundation retreats in Enugu, Tobi gave a closing speech. His voice trembled slightly. "If you ever lose something good because of pride, don't waste time mourning what left. Use the lesson to rebuild who remains." After the applause, he sat quietly, feeling an ache in his chest. A few months later, he passed peacefully in his sleep. No drama, no regret. Beside his bed lay his worn-out Bible and a photo of the rehabilitation centre, labelled Where I Found Grace. When Adanna received the news, she wept, not from bitterness, but from gratitude. She travelled to his burial in his hometown, a quiet village near Ibadan. The service was small, simple, attended mostly by the men he had mentored. Standing by his grave, she said softly, "You finished well, Tobi. May your soul rest in peace." As the pastor ended the service, a gentle rain began to fall, like a final cleansing from heaven. That evening, Adanna sat by the window of her hotel room, watching the rain. Nsukka joined her, wrapping an arm around her shoulder. "Are you okay?" he asked. She nodded slowly. "Yes, it feels like a circle just closed." He squeezed her hand. "Life doesn't always give second chances, but when it does, it's to teach us gratitude." She smiled faintly. "And forgiveness." In the years that followed, Adanna grew older gracefully. Her hair turned silver, her eyes softer but wiser. She remained active in her work, mentoring young women about integrity, teaching them that wealth without character is poverty in disguise. When journalists asked about her success, she would always say, "It wasn't the company that made me rich, it was the peace I refused to sell." Sometimes, she'd visit her hometown in Nsukka, sitting with village women under mango trees, listening to their laughter. She'd tell them stories about patience and destiny, ending each with a proverb. One of her favorites was, "A woman's tears may water sorrow, but they also grow strength." They would nod, smiling, and call her Mama Wisdom. On her 70th birthday, surrounded by children, grandchildren, and friends, she looked around the celebration hall and whispered to herself, "This is what healing looks like when it's done well." A framed picture of her younger self and Tobi on their wedding day hung quietly in one corner, not as a reminder of pain, but as proof that storms can still produce flowers. As the celebration drew to a close, she gave one final toast. "If life ever breaks you, don't stay broken. Let the pieces form a new design. God may delay, but he never forgets. The heart that stays kind will never remain poor forever." The guests clapped, some wiping tears, others smiling through emotion. The music rose softly, a slow high-life tune drifting into the night. Outside, the moon hung full, silvering the earth with peace. Adanna closed her eyes briefly, breathing in the scent of jollof rice, laughter, and gratitude. And somewhere in that eternal silence between the heart and heaven, it was as if destiny itself whispered back, "Well done."